All right. Hi, everybody. We'll just get started now. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's event on the evolution of our workplaces and workspaces. This is part 2 of our 2-part series, and today we're focusing on wellness and social engagement. I am Melanie McNeil, the chair of the Vancouver chapter of the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, or IPAC. I am so happy to be joined today by my colleague Sonia Zoller, chair of IPAC Victoria, who you'll hear from shortly as well. Today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. I'm joining you from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. For generations, many Indigenous groups and communities have celebrated their culture and heritage on June 21st or around that time of year because of the significance of the summer solstice of the longest day of the year. Tomorrow, on National Indigenous Peoples Day, we recognize and celebrate the history, heritage, resilience, and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across Canada. This is a day that's made by and for Indigenous peoples in Canada. We encourage you to take the time tomorrow to observe National Indigenous Peoples Day in your own way. Now, for today's panel session, it's being co-hosted by IPAC's Vancouver and Victoria regional chapters with support from our friends at IPAC National in Ottawa. To get things started, I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for today's session, Lisa Nye, a longtime member of the Vancouver board. Lisa worked in the BC Public Service for 28 years in a variety of areas, including Indigenous community development, treaty negotiations, education and training, energy development, health, and tourism. In 2010, Lisa set up her own consulting practice and has worked to support the goals of Indigenous nations and communities, other governments, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. Lisa has continued to be a member of IPAC Victoria and then IPAC Vancouver boards since 2010. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for that introduction. And I am joining you today from the unceded and traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I'm honored to live with my family on these beautiful and rich lands. And I honor and I respect that I'm a visitor on these lands and work to build and nurture respectful and enduring relationships with the lands and the Indigenous peoples who I've lived on and with since for many, many years now. And I'm pleased to introduce our panelists and our discussion topic today as well. And we are very, very humbled to have such experienced and knowledgeable speakers with us today. So again, thank you for participating in this continued conversation on the evolving nature of workplaces and how we are transforming the state of work in the public sector, focusing on remote and hybrid environments. Today, we'll engage in a dialogue, we'll ask questions, and we'll learn from others. And again, as Melanie said, this is part 2. So within remote and hybrid workspaces, organizations will need to focus on innovative and supportive ways to undertake coaching, relationship connections, and supporting healthy work strategies in a more purposeful way. So networking and collaboration will occur in different contexts that enable workers to connect in teams and to work individually through these new spaces. Skills training and development may occur differently in remote and hybrid models, and this is a key issue for worker satisfaction, health and wellness, employee retention, succession, and career planning. All important topics that we will hear a bit about today. And we need to focus attention on our communications within these work settings and explore some very important questions about how workers and employers achieve various goals within these hybrid and in-person environments. So again, we're thrilled to have our 4 knowledgeable speakers with us today, and I'll just introduce them. Noreen Kassam. Noreen is the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer and CFO at the City of Burnaby. She implements municipal policy and oversees department heads in delivering services to Burnaby citizens. Her portfolio encompasses finance, intergovernmental relations, strategic partnerships, indigenous relations and reconciliation, customer service, and other projects. She founded the Civic Innovation Lab that is a partnership between the city and SFU. which uses academia to solve city-related problems. Noreen is an accredited professional and innovative executive with over 25 years of progressive career experience, including City of Surrey, Metro Vancouver, and the Auditor General. Noreen lives in Surrey with her husband and her 2 children and is an avid soccer player with the Women's Metro Soccer League. Thank you, Noreen. Eva Lewis. Eva is a member of SFU's Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences co-op team, and in that role, she works directly with a diverse group of master's and undergraduate students before, during, and after their co-op terms. Eva's master's co-op portfolio includes public policy, international studies, political science, and urban studies. The opportunity to engage with and learn from community organizations, co-op employers, and alumni are key reasons why Eva enjoys her work. Eva is based at the SFU Vancouver campus and has adapted to a hybrid work arrangement. So welcome, Eva. Krista Olson. Krista Olson is Gitxsan Daka First Nations from the community of, I should have pronounced this in advance, but Siksika, currently residing in New Hazelton. After graduating from the University of Northern British Columbia in 2019, she joined the BC Public Service by way of the Indigenous Youth Internship Program, just months before COVID-19 pandemic brought sweeping remote work placements. So that's a big change. After moving from the Ministry of Forests to Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Krista relocated back to the Hazelton area where she works with several northern communities on sociocultural and community well-being initiatives. Welcome, Krista. Katrina. Katrina serves as a junior policy analyst on the policy planning and appeals team within the Disaster Recovery Division at the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. Since joining the ministry in 2023, she has had the opportunity to contribute to 2 different teams, gaining diverse insights and experiences in disaster and recovery policy. Working remotely from her apartment in Kitsilano, Vancouver, has further enriched her experience and professional development by allowing Katrina to explore virtual work and gain skills in navigating them. She recently earned her Master's of Public Policy from SFU, leading a capstone project titled Transcending Identity Policy Solutions to Legal Gender Affirmation Barriers in BC. And it's now available on the SFU library site. Welcome, Katrina. So we're going to begin our discussion today with each of our speakers talking a little bit about their experience, their stories, and their knowledge of working in hybrid and mixed work environments. So to start us off today with this interesting conversation, I would like to turn it over to Noreen Gitxsan. Over to you, Noreen.
Lisa, thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. But before I go any further, I would like to recognize that I am presenting from the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Hunkaminam and Squamish speaking peoples, and to extend appreciation for the opportunity to be on this territory. So as mentioned, I am with the City of Burnaby, a local government that has many lines of business, engineering, planning, parks, HR, IT, finance. You can see the spectrum, ranging from laborers to back office. So our work is very customer focused. We're all here to deliver services to the citizens ultimately of Burnaby and create a city we all want to live in and be in. Work from home sometimes doesn't work for certain roles. So when we have water, sewer, garbage transportation, water crews, those particular roles are really hard to work from home. However, we do have back office roles that could potentially work from home, like IT staff or financial analysts or call center staff. So where it's operationally feasible, and I'll just define that for a minute, operationally feasible means that the ability is there from having access to equipment, systems, records, and so forth. So where it's operationally feasible in our environment, our work from home policy does allow for 1 to 3 days per week to work from home. Now, also here at the city, we do have a program where many staff are part of a 9-day fortnight, which means that every 2 weeks they earn a day off. So if a staff member is under the schedule and they work from home 3 days, there is a week where they're only in 1 day in that week. Now, in general, hiring, of course, continues to be a challenge, and the work from home opportunity comes up quite often in interviews, to see if staff could be allowed to do that. And we're competing, obviously, with our neighboring municipalities and other levels of government for staffing, and but none of the policies are the same between the various levels of government either. You hear about certain levels of government calling people back to work fully, and others the opposite, allowing full-time work from home. So there isn't any uniformity, which also makes it a challenge. But we do see that hires, are looking for flexibility, and so that does come up in interviews quite often. There are two schools of thought in general within the organization also. And that's tough. It's a challenge because, everyone's not, again, uniform in their way of thinking. However, we have been working with staff to implement, change management around different tools and training with staff who do work from home. Something to keep in mind here when we're having some discussions around, with staff is that it's with work from home, we find whether they're for interactions in general, whether there's meetings or touching base or training, we find that all those interactions need to be planned and deliberate. And this, has been taking extra time with managers and supervisors as they're managing people in person as well as online. And it's just some extra, again, like I said, training and tools that need to be provided to managers in order to be able to manage the diverse staff and whether they're working from home or at the office. But our staff has grown also over the last few years since COVID. And so we've fallen into space requirements, which then in many cases work from home, wherever, again, operationally feasible, does work well because we can look to desk share and we can save on space. So there's many pros and cons. We do feel right now we have a pretty balanced approach that is manageable, where we are providing, again, work from home opportunities where it is operationally feasible, and again, deliberately planning interactions, whether they're online and in person. And just one other comment, just when we're talking to staff who come into the office also, we are recognizing and they are communicating that it does create many more touch points, because if there's in-person meetings planned, they seem to be able to connect with people, and get a few conversations or things done prior to the meeting or after the meeting that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do online. And they do appreciate the 1 to 2 days coming in, because it also provides that different space and different environment to come in and have those interactions. So that's kind of our way of the land right now, and how we operate here at the City of Burnaby. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Noreen. Really helpful to hear about the municipal kind of context and specific to the city of Burnaby. Now I'm going to ask Eva, please, to talk a little about your environment experiences as well.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm today grateful to live and work on the unceded and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. So my work really, again, focuses on undergrad and master's students who are young professionals really wanting to gain workplace experience and insight. And so I'm kind of coming at it from that perspective in just some, comments, feedback that working students have shared with me since we made this switch to remote or hybrid work arrangements, and that really again came really drastically in the summer of 2020 when co-op work terms very suddenly shifted to remote, and it's evolved since then, of course. And I think we've all learned a ton about virtual meetings and engaging with teams virtually, and having people spread out across time zones. And so I thought I'd just kind of raise a few things in terms of some of those, what can be seen as benefits, but what can also be some of those challenges, especially for those young professionals in that new workplace reality. So, I mean, of course, students sort of enjoy that flexibility that comes with being able to work either fully remotely or 2 days a week in the office and 3 days from home. So that flexibility, it develops the time management skills, and there's a lot that needs to be understood from that. And I think some level of remote work is likely here to stay. And so in this kind of a student context, it's great to get that exposure early on. Now most students are almost fully back to in-person classes. I mean, of course, as we know, there was a time when SFU and all the major post-secondaries did a massive switch over to virtual classes. But for the most part, students, I think, quite happily are back in, with their peers, fellow students, with their professors in that kind of in-person learning environment. And so now during co-op work terms and beyond their graduation, it's back into this dynamic of, potentially, again, working on their own. And so things like, it reduces, commuting time, and just that convenience factor is certainly there. Then on the challenge side, I think, the isolation piece of this is very real, and especially for co-op students who they're just walking in to join this team, whereas often with people who have been in an organization for a longer stretch of time, they've known these people, they've known their colleagues in person. They're not suddenly having to meet these people for the first time within a box that's like this big. So I think, really managers can really do a service to their new staff by really fostering some of those conversations that can, again, if they need to happen in a virtual space, but making it, having that openness to the get to know you kind of conversations. Because I think there's a lot that has to happen in terms of trust. And knowing really clearly what some of those expectations are, and those communication channels become really important for new staff and younger staff. And so I'm talking about the 20 to 30-year-olds, where this is potentially their first job working in an office. So there's tons to learn. There'd be tons to learn if it was only in person, and it adds this other layer when there's the remote component. And it's just harder to engage with colleagues, harder to kind of reach out, maybe, so I think so much needs to happen in terms of really those students knowing who they can talk to, maybe having a dedicated sort of mentor or go-to person, and having I know some students have talked to me about how much they appreciated even just informal coffee chats when they first started working, and with, just one-on-one, or just these, where they were encouraged to have these these were set up on their behalf so that they could actually have some dedicated time with each member on their team. And so I think those kinds of things become really important, and being able to talk about, things besides work, also I think comes into play. And also for students, their desk, their home situation may not be as conducive to working compared to being, in an office environment. So I think there's always those factors to take into account when it comes to their actual, physical space of where they're able to work. And I'll just wrap up a couple of things, but just really for young professionals, this is prime time in terms of relationship building, really getting a sense of what a work environment is like, learning from senior people. And so I think, important that colleagues and managers keep that in mind when it comes to what are the best ways of drawing out some of that experience, and having students involved in whether it's virtual, specific virtual meetings, but anytime there's, when students are in person, on those in-person days with the team, I guess really maximizing that as much as possible when it comes to opportunities that may arise, not only for training, but also the learning part. Because I think that's one of the things that sometimes gets more challenging, is for people to get, like really have that sense of how they're doing in a new job, how they're doing, what kind of feedback they're getting. So really clear feedback, that clear open channel of communication, again, becomes really, really key. So I think I'll leave it at that, but look forward to what the other panel members are also going to contribute and getting into some discussion as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eva. You've laid out some good sort of balancing factors, and I think just your comments about students starting and the first time is virtually, and some people that are started their work getting interviewed virtually and maybe not seeing the team until like a year or so later in person. Like, it can be a long period of time in that stretch that we've had. So thank you for that. Krista, please, over to you.
Thanks,
you.
Lisa. Also wanted to acknowledge that I'm currently calling in from the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations here in Victoria, where I am very happy to actually be here to connect with my team as we say farewell to a much beloved director with the Community and Social Innovations branch. Although, as you mentioned, Lisa, I do call New Hazelton home, and very, very, very grateful and fortunate to be able to have relocated back to my territory in 2022. As was mentioned earlier, I started with the BC Public Service in September of 2019 by way of the Indigenous Youth Internship Program. And my cohort 13 was the last to be able to connect to each other in person before the pandemic hit, and we moved to fully virtual by March 2020. And for anybody having joined us today who have had experience with the Indigenous Youth Internship Program, it brings together young Indigenous professionals from all over the province for the opportunity to work in government and to make some of these connections and to get some of this experience. So naturally moving into a fully virtual environment was a massive interruption to the program. So that's kind of the position from which I approach this general conversation. Because being young Indigenous professionals getting started in government, for several, it was the first kind of step into this type of work environment. For several of us, we're coming out of university for the first time, and it's a challenging path to walk before all of these massive sweeping changes. So to learn how to navigate this new environment while also being detached from family and culture and land was quite the task. And I'm very, very grateful to have had the support of the program, my team at the Ministry of Forests, and then the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, where I seconded, was truly what got many of us through that first year of COVID, and being able to develop those connections before stepping into the post-COVID world was it really, there are just no words for what that experience was like. And I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to serve as a mentor for year 14, where we had this new cohort young Indigenous professionals who were stepping into this space without having had those opportunities to develop connections. So it really kind of put a new lens on how we are establishing and developing and maintaining relationships, not just between ourselves as this group of people moving through a shared experience, but how we were approaching the concept of relationship development and building through this lens of professionalism as individuals, and really having to pause and to take stock of how we were able to move through and to maintain the connections and avenues of self-development that we had kind of applied for this opportunity to be able to grow professionally. So that was 2020, 2021, as we kind of began to get some of these practices in place. The BC Public Service, very similarly to what Noreen described, we have a couple of days a week where we can work from home, anything beyond that requiring additional approval, of course. And I've been mostly virtual since then. When I was competing for my current position, it had become very, very obvious that I was needed at home to care for family. And after more than 6 years away for school and work, it was well past time that I needed to return to my territory. And fortunately, that wasn't enough to tank my interview. And I was offered the opportunity to join the Community and Social Innovations branch here at the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. So I accepted the position, and did so with the understanding that I would be relocating as soon as I could secure housing, which I did in May 2022. And now we have 2 of us who are regionally based in the north, which I think was very much in the interest of developing and maintaining relationships with the nations that we're working with as a branch in a different way. And I'm very, very grateful to have the opportunity to be navigating this work in proximity to the nations that we are working with, that we're walking this path with. And I think that, when we talk about skill development, when we talk about accumulating experience within some of these professional spaces, that there's a definite element to be considered in terms of scope of work and our accessibility to nations that we're walking in partnership with. And maybe I'll just pause there and hand it back to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Krista. Quite the journey. And I think just the balancing of all the different aspects that I think Noreen alluded to, as well as the remote work and the recruitment and the family balances and what our priorities are. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing your story. And Katrina, please.
Just want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
So I'm Katrina, and as you heard from my introduction, I am a junior policy analyst with the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. I am calling in today from the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, otherwise known as Kitsilano, BC. I have worked remotely since May of 2023 in my little apartment here. And I do feel qualified to weigh in on this because I've had the experience of working fully in office in a BC government role, hybrid in a BC government role, and now fully remote. So I've experienced all 3. And in my first role, I actually experienced working fully in office while 90% of my team was fully remote. So I do have a lot of experience with building relationships remotely, and that has sort of informed, I think, the positive experience I've had in this co-op to auxiliary role that I have right now. So I started my co-op fully remote last summer, and I my main office is in Surrey, so I opted to stay fully remote because of the 1.5 hour commute each way. Most of my team worked remotely, so that was people from all over the province, and this made the transition to remote work a lot easier because everyone was skilled and trained in onboarding people remotely. So throughout this entire year and 2 months, I've stayed remote and it has been a really positive experience. So I've used many tools and steps to navigate this, and including participating socially in person and going the extra mile with lots of my colleagues, having the types of meetings that some of my fellow panelists were talking about, coffee chats, getting to know people, meeting up outside of work, those types of things. I've worked on 2 separate teams since being here at EMCR, and I've really had to push myself to network and create those connections. And I think it definitely takes a lot of extra energy. But also, if you are an introvert like myself, it can be a really positive experience because you get to create those boundaries with work. So what I've learned is that you really do need to be a self-starter. You really do need to be able to push yourself and motivate yourself to join in on the optional things at work. So with the BC government, that looks like for example, all last week it was BC Public Service Week, and there was lots of games and activities all happening virtually. So those things are optional, but participating in them will create connections and will create an environment where you're able to feel connected to this team and as if you're working in an office together. So I decided to put together a list of 4 pros and 4 cons because that's how my brain works and that's how I can sort of talk about this experience. So I'll start with the positives. And I mentioned this before, was just work boundaries. So I found that in an office, people would often come into my cubicle space, which was not an office, it was a cubicle space, and just chat. And this is awesome for social connections, and I am a social person, but I found that extremely distracting, especially throughout my day. People would come in and out. I've been an office administrator as well. And for those of you who have experienced that, there can be very little boundaries with people sort of interrupting your tasks or meetings or what have you. So I really enjoy the aspect of working from home where I'm able to sort of schedule those meetings in advance, or if someone wants to talk to me, they can sort of message me and ask, can we have a meeting? And I'm always willing to do that and be available, but I'm able to have those boundaries with colleagues, which I find is really great. And then the other thing, that the obvious one, is the work-life balance. No commute. In Vancouver, a lot of folks will work in Surrey, Burnaby, North Vancouver, all these things, and the transit is awesome here, but it might take you an hour and a half, 2 hours to go each way. And being able to have that extra time to sleep in the morning and to get off from my shift and go outside and go to my workout classes, that has really positively benefited my life. And I think that to be able to do that, especially if you have children or something like that, is really beneficial. I also find it has saved me so much money. So it's really cost effective because I'm not buying lunch out. I'm not buying coffees out. I'm making my food from home. And this is probably something people don't talk about as often, but when I worked in an office, I would treat myself to coffees out all the time and buy lunch and all those things. And you have to prep your lunch. It's a lot of extra effort. So it's cost effective too. And the other thing that I noticed on this team specifically was that everyone is hybrid or remote. So when you do go into the office, you might be the only person there. And that sort of takes away from that office culture. So if you want to have an in-person meeting, those actually don't happen on my team. There are no in-person meetings because everyone is in Victoria, Northern BC, Vancouver, all over the place. And so all of our meetings are virtual anyway. So if you do go into the office to get that social connection, to spend your 1 or 2 days a week, you might just be sitting at your computer on your laptop the whole day in meetings virtually, which defeats the purpose. So that is something that I've noticed that's a positive from working at home, is that everyone is also working from home. The cons, a lot of these are quite obvious and have been mentioned before, but it can be very isolating. I think this depends on how self-aware you are about your own mental health. And this also depends on who you are as a person. Are you an extrovert, an introvert? Do you have people around? Do you have roommates? All these types of things. I know my own limits with social isolation, and I've really come up with tools and behaviors that help me navigate this. But I have several friends who have not navigated it very well and have become incredibly depressed or feel very socially isolated in their remote roles, specifically in roles exactly equivalent to what I've been doing, and just feel like they're not able to connect with their team in the ways that they want to on a regular basis. And then that leads me into my next one, which is creating stronger relationships and connections, which everyone has spoken about. But this might mean actually really going the extra mile socially and getting colleagues' numbers and trying to meet up for coffee, or maybe go to a conference together, or maybe do something work related in person, or deciding when to go to the office together, like in person for one day, and being like, okay, we're all going to go on Wednesday, and kind of going the extra mile with those connections, I think is so important. And I think Eva touched on this, but career opportunities. I think career opportunities are available virtually, and you can, of course, advance yourself in all the ways you can in person, but it's really hard to stand out remotely because I'm not seeing executives, I'm not seeing managers in person all the time like I would if I was in an office. Often my work goes through several people before it reaches an executive level. So there is those barriers. Whereas if I was physically in an office, I would be talking to executives in meetings. I'd be showing my face. People would know who I was. So you're kind of having to find ways to get noticed, which might sound odd, but that's kind of the reality of remote work. And then the last one, and this one is a bit odd, but tech dependence. So I find that remote work, you really have to have a super strong internet connection, and you also have to have a really good work from home setup. So you have to have an environment where if you had roommates, your roommates aren't around all the time. If you don't have a home office, making sure that that's like quiet and private, especially if you're doing work that is confidential, all those things. So it's kind of like you do have to have a unique setup, good internet connection, private space, which a lot of people my age don't have. So that's definitely the cons that I could think of. But all that being said, I would, out of all my jobs and in-person office roles, I would definitely rather work from home. It's created so much work-life balance. I feel like I'm able to fully bring more of myself to the job because of the benefits that I've gotten from working from home. But I also fully think this depends of who you are as a person. And if you're able to be a self-starter, you are into leadership, you like participating in things, I think that makes remote work better. But if you are more of a person who likes to take the back seat, more passive with connections, I think being in office would definitely be better. But that's just on my experience.
Thank you, Katrina. Well, that was that was a very organized list of pros and cons. I get you to help me with some of my analysis of pros and cons. What's your number? No, very no, very very helpful, and it's really interesting to hear that because it sounds like if a person has a sort of a base preference for a number of reasons, whether it's your the way you're made up or your your personality, whatever those are, that you layer on those other things. So whether you lay on the social and mental stuff to get your support, or the really work at making those connections, if if that's so it is really interesting to hear that because it's not always a situation where you can be in that at home or remote place and coast. If you want to, career path or other kinds of things. And I thought that I never thought about that completely either. That comment you made, Katrina, about I'm sorry, I'm just sort of piggybacking off of this, but the fact that you go into the office perhaps to have that in person and there's no one else there, it sort of does defeat the purpose of being in the office. And I had quite sort of landed on that concept before. So the extra effort is to get other people there at the same time, obviously. So that's awesome. Thank you. So thank you to everybody. I mean, everybody on the panel, Noreen, Eva, Krista, and Katrina shared different experiences. And it just, I think goes to show we're gonna open it up now for some dialogue, sort of questions and comments from the participants. But it really does show a really, that there's a great diversity around how this occurs, what the genesis was, we know, but there's organizations that have been in the remote place for some time because of just their geographic location of their work. It's just the reality in the federal context. We heard the last session, and some other kind of emerging priority. This remote work and hybrid work. I mean, back in the day, you would, it was very hard to get flexible work, even from Souk. I had a colleague that worked at Souk, and it was a bit of a commute. So really, really challenging things that are moving in positive ways. So thank you for all of those good words. We're going to open it up now for comments, questions, of course, from our participants. We have, of course, on your bottom of your screen the Q&A tab. So please start to put your questions into that little question mark box, and we will kind of bring those forward and hear some other thoughts on your queries that you have as those wanting to learn more, obviously, about this topic, in addition to what's been shared. So happy to entertain any of those questions. So we'll just give people a second there. And as individuals are starting to put those in, I just wanted to start with a question to all of our speakers, really, and whoever would like to jump in on this. We talked a bit about the different ways to I think someone mentioned, I think Eva, having a mentor. We talked about some of the wellness and connections and how we maybe cope in a more isolated environment than it is in a work situation. I just wanted to sort of kind of tease out the question about what are any other suggestions from any of the speakers around those key elements of the remote and hybrid work? So mentorship, wellness, social connecting, and relationship development. Any ideas that you've achieved within your work environments that have worked particularly well in those kind of categories of really working, being connected, working well, managing your wellness? So maybe open it up to any sort of specific kind of practices that have worked, and then we'll continue on with some other questions from the participants. So any thoughts on what elements have particularly worked well for you in any of those kind of supportive pieces of your work?
Thanks for that question, Lisa. I'll just maybe
Yeah.
start quickly while we're also waiting for questions too. I just wanted to reiterate something that that you said about how some sort of work from home or hybrid or remote work is here to stay in some sort of fashion. But I also think, and kind of Katrina alluded to this, it's very personality based too, right?
Mhm.
So we have people here who, can work from home, but don't want to work from home because they really, want to come into the office. It's again, back to, this is the workspace and home is the home space type thing. And then there's others who cannot work from home or are trying to find anything and everything to piece together to be able to do that at home at least one day a week. But again, going back to, it has to be in my mind. In my talk, I did talk about operationally feasible around, you got to have access to all the tools, your environment has to be set up. And again, Katrina alluded to that too. Because you have to be able to, sort of focus and also get your work done also. But back to, the question that you asked around the wellness, social connection, relationship, and I go back to something else that I also mentioned about being deliberate with that too. And I think that was alluded to by all the speakers. You have to take the time to participate. You have to take the time to plan meetings. You have to take the time to connect with people. And I think that that's really important and required. So whether that again needs to be planned in a day, or there's just an opportunity to be able to do that, and people take advantage of that, and it just has to be available and planned. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, no, that's a good comment, because sometimes you might need to put an hour in your day once a week for that purposeful thing, because otherwise the time just kind of gets absorbed, doesn't it? Any other thoughts on those?
Yeah. So I think that in kind of discussing what has worked well for me and my teams actually, I think it's as both Noreen and Katrina kind of spoke to, is navigating your connections and your relationships with intention and knowing yourself well enough. And I really appreciate, Katrina, what you had spoken to, because I went through something very, very similar with that rapid transition from kind of the burnout post-university into adapting to a new professional environment, and then just a new way of living and navigating that professional environment. I learned a lot about myself, my relationship to productivity, my relationship to my own social restrictions. I
Mm.
I think I struggled well, we all struggle, but I definitely came to realize in the first months there how how taxing I had how taxing I'd begun to find kind of casual social interaction,
Mhm.
and how fragile my own focus was. And
Mhm.
that kind of mentality that you must be X amount of productive in order to log off at the end of the day, and you know how to maintain healthy boundaries with my relationship to my work, with my relationship to my own productivity, with my relationship to my colleagues. And I'm definitely better for it. I feel like the quality of my work has improved simply because I'm able to direct more of my focus on how to do it with intention and in a good way, as opposed to having, the multiple unnecessary threads that I didn't realize was pulling as much of my energy as they were. And not to disparage or discount the importance of those casual connections, and maintaining a team dynamic in a really good way, but without having kind of been forced to address some of those of personal restrictions, to develop a more fulsome understanding of my own
Mhm.
cognitive topography, for lack of a better term, was really, really important, and I think really, really well timed, given how I had kind of skidded in sideways after university, completely my own fault, taking on way too much. And that was kind of a really good realization too. So my first team that I joined with the Ministry of Forests, where we're all fairly close in age, it was a small team. And we found that kind of more consistent, informal, non-dialogue was what worked best for us. And what I mean by that is our broader team had instituted a daily check-in, check-out kind of mechanism, so that we're making sure that everybody is in and settled. But none of us commanded the English language especially well before either our third cup of coffee or 9 a.m., whichever came first. So we had this might throw some professionalism into question, but we had kind of a running thread of memes and gifts, pardon me, and other forms of nonverbal communication, where it was kind of an indicator of how we were feeling that day, or where we were coming from, or a continuation on kind of an ongoing joke. So it allowed us to connect in a more personal way, almost, without actually having to pick up the phone and call or shoot a text. It was, oh, that's the kind of day it's going to be. So maybe I'm going to be a little bit more patient with this person today, or maybe I'm going to take a little bit more time to, make them laugh that
Mm.
day. Or, it's kind of given me a flag. Maybe I'll send them an invite for a coffee meeting later, or whatever it happened to be. And I feel like, especially in those early months, it really gave us an avenue of getting to know one another in a way that you may not necessarily get the ability to do in, a formal professional setting. You get to get more of a flavor of that person's sense of humor, of how they communicate. So that really helped to erode some of the virtual barriers to connection, I think. Whereas where I am now, I am the youngest person on my team, And there's several more of us than there were when I was with forestry. And because of the organization of my branch, I don't always get the ability or the opportunity rather to connect with some of my colleagues if they're not a part of my immediate twig. So we have our First Nations team, we have our urban team, and we have our Métis team. And because of where we are geographically, because of the focus of our files, because of many things, even if we were all here, we might not necessarily get that same time together. We might not necessarily get that same casual interaction with one another. So what we've done is we have a held time every morning that is not mandatory. If you want to log in at 8:45 and take 10 or 15 minutes to have your coffee, touch base with your colleagues. Sometimes it's, life updates, sometimes it's work updates, sometimes it's whatever happens to be top of mind that day. And yeah, those are just a couple of things that have worked, but I think a lot of it is knowing yourself, knowing your team, and finding what works best for everybody.
Thank you, Krista. Those are really interesting examples. I like that concept of the gifts and that way of approaching everybody. Because when I look back to some of the work settings and you're in person, those casual photocopier conversations, it was hard to manage them in a good way and hear about what's going on with people without thinking like you're being rude, like I don't want to talk to you right now, or we don't learn those things in a real time work setting by being that nurturing that understanding and at the same time not and having your own having some space and that's and that touch base in the morning sounds really great. Thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions that have come in then. We've got for Noreen, talking at a little more detailed level. Are there any examples of the tools available for managers and for staff in working in these settings? You might have touched on that a little bit. So if there's anything you'd want to add around the tools.
Absolutely, I can get into a little bit more detail. Thank you for the question. So what we do have is agreements on an annual basis that are signed by the supervisor as well as the employee, in understanding, what the work from home environment and plan looks like. So and the expectations, of course, right, all outlined. And then of course there's mandatory training for both the supervisors and the staff, because again, staff want to make sure again you have the right environment at home, and for supervisors, what does that mean? How do you have oversight, and how do you make sure that staff's still performing? So that plays into a work plan, right? Ensuring that that supervisors have a work plan, or that staff clearly know again the expectations more detailed in a work plan. And then from there, ensuring, I think, Krista, you mentioned this, check-in and check-outs, right? So there's constant connection, communication, and then meetings, whether they're mandatory or non-mandatory, attendance. Not that anyone's, obviously if they're not mandatory, not that anyone's sort of checking, but if they're mandatory, obviously people are checking to make sure that, there's attendance and focus and so forth. But it's again just making sure that there's that understanding that yes, the flexibility is there, but the work also needs to get done, in line with the employment contract, and then again the agreement to work from home and the work plans. So yeah, I hope that helps and answer the question.
Thanks very much, Noreen. Next question focuses a bit on, or does focus on recruitment related to remote and hybrid policies. And we've heard some, examples of where employers having that increasing flexibility, which it, obviously has generated, probably since 2019, 2020. So questions around how the flexibility of both different ministries, but also the city of Burnaby's, how the flexibility around those models of work has impacted recruitment. I think we heard in Krista, your example where that was obviously critically important, and we can see that playing out in a number of places where that balance of work life and other kinds of things just makes it more doable. And same with Katrina. So going to start with a question around the impacts, benefits and other challenges around recruitment. So maybe this person is interested in City of Burnaby, but also in any comments from other organizations, I guess, around how you view that recruitment space within, given this scenario, the scenario of these models.
Thank you, Lisa. And I did allude to it when I first talked about our work from home environment, and it has been a challenge and continues to be because there are expectations. So really, it's just laying that providing that communication right up front. At the city, we do believe here that it's necessary to have people back in the office, and hence the 1 to 3 days to
Right.
allow for that, right? Again, depending on if the job allows for it, whether it's operationally feasible. Because we do believe that you do get a lot more accomplished. Again, I think I might have mentioned this in our prep session too, that we are humans, and that we do have all our senses, and that play into being around groups and people. And yeah, absolutely, we have different personalities, introverts, extroverts, but in the end, I think we all do come together and need some sort of physical interaction too, face to face. And so that's something that we do really pride ourselves on, and just communicating that to people and making sure that there's an understanding on it right from the get-go, so that there's no misinterpretation or miscommunication on it, right? So yeah.
No, that's really clear that you often hear employer agreements that set the tone and context, as long as there's two parties to that process, and it's really important to know what expectations are. It's sometimes hard just in a regular work settings and in-person settings, what you're expected to deliver on. You've got your job descriptions and that, but I think that obviously more is happening and evolving in that context. So thank you for that, Noreen. Any other thoughts or comments around recruitment? Maybe Eva?
Yeah,
Looks
just
like you're about to-
certainly recruitment wise, I think that flexibility definitely plays into it as a factor when students or new grads are looking at what kind of options they have. And there was a time when certainly in a co-op context, when students would be doing work terms and they'd be relocating to Ottawa. They'd be picking up, moving, finding a place to live in Ottawa, and working there for 4 months or 8 months, surviving an Ontario winter, instead of being on the West Coast. And now, big shift, and they are working here in Vancouver. They may be starting work at 6 or 7 a.m. in order to kind of align a little bit more with, Ottawa time zone, but it's doable. And for those students that, where it's not realistic to make that kind of a full, geographic
Yes.
move, they're still able to gain that, that experience. And I think the federal government and I think maybe even the province as well are, have a little bit more adaptability or consideration for having people in, not simply in a central hub. And
Mhm.
the benefit, I think, of regional voices, the benefit of having teams kind of across across different communities is a good thing, instead of it all being kind of focused on the in-person. But I mean, I also think when there are opportunities for in-person, I know that some of our students have talked about recently, again, with summer work terms, some of them are working with BC government ministries where they went and spent 2 or 3 days in Victoria meeting with their team. And there were some specific meetings and sessions that they were part of, and that was really valuable. And then, then they returned back to Vancouver and are working from home or working from a local government office here on the mainland. So those kinds of arrangements, even if it's a situation where students or young professionals are making occasional trips to a central office, I think that, as long as there's that, that willingness to do that on the part of both employee and employer, that can be a really, that can be very enriching.
Yes, I sort of feel like the shifts that have happened reasonably quickly. I mean, it hasn't, been, when you look back, it seems quick that these changes have happened, because I know back, just what you're saying, Eva, that when I was, in the provincial system, it was, go to these regional places, and then that's how you'll move up or whatever. So you had to do your, do some different experiences in that regard. And I think for many, to the points that you raised, Krista, were challenging to think that they would, need to move to Smithers for 4 years and to where else for 4 years in order to advance to their home place in Victoria and vice versa. So really interesting to see how that really can have an impact in terms of that whole journey or process. Any other? I know that both Krista and Katrina, you've kind of lived this out in terms of that it's a real benefit to the recruitment for yourselves in the organizations you're in. Any thoughts from either of you on recruitment and the impact on these flexible models?
Definitely, definitely. I think I had kind of mentioned in passing earlier about, and again, speaking specifically from my own experience and the background that I come from is, there's a massive amount of talent and a massive amount of potential that we see in young professionals and young Indigenous professionals in rural and remote areas in different parts of the province. And, and also to consider kind of the social atmosphere that we live in right now. It's just not sustainable to expect young people from outside of urban centers to make it down into the lower mainland, to be able to afford to live in Vancouver, to live in Victoria. I mean, it was a definite consideration for me. And as much as I did not expect to fall in love with Victoria as much as I did, because it is a beautiful place to be, and I was so grateful to have had the opportunity to live and work here as a visitor in these beautiful territories. It's not home. These lands move differently, and I know that there are huge opportunities now that we've begun to really embrace these hybrid models, to tap into that talent, to tap into these resources. And the other avenue of that is when we have people who do leave, who do move to the cities, who do get into these professional spaces, we're also depriving a lot of these small communities of some of that embodied talent, of some of their presence in these territories, in these communities, in these small towns and villages, because it's not a 24-hour hat that we wear as public servants, as young professionals. So there are roles that these folks would otherwise be playing in their communities if they were able to continue to live and work there. So that's kind of a huge consideration for me when we talk about recruitment and very importantly retention. Yeah.
Absolutely. The other, just the other roles that individuals play beyond their 9 to 5 or whatever that may be is absolutely a great point. Thank you for that. I don't know, Katrina, if you want to jump in at all, or we can move to another question.
Well, I would love to speak to the question that was just posed about accomplishments and measurable outcomes.
Absolutely. It's a very good one.
Yeah. So I was going to say this to the first question you asked, but I would say the biggest thing about that for like if you're just starting out or you're trying to advance in your position is setting super public goals. So basically within the BC government, there is a portal to do this, and it's a performance development platform, and that, every 6 months you revisit it, you write out your goals. I would encourage anyone that doesn't have that to do that anyway, to have meetings with your supervisors, managers, or keep a log of your goals in detail with time-bound goals that will allow you to reach them. And also, once you've accomplished them, you're able to share that with your team. I also believe in like really loud goal setting. So if you're in a meeting, which I'm, regularly in meetings with my team and my branch and my division, is sharing those goals with everyone. So I'm hoping to get this briefing note approved by the ADM by June 15th. And just sharing those so that when you do accomplish those things, you're able to log that in your performance development and also share it with the team. So I find that that's a way that I can navigate that progress and help make sure that I'm getting credit for this work that I'm doing remotely. and also keeping a folder and a file of all your accomplishments. So I do this on, we obviously have the local area network drive that we save everything on for everyone to access, but keeping a log of the briefing notes that you've written, of the policies that you've worked on, all these things, because when it comes to those performance development conversations, you're able to then open that up and quickly be like, these are all the things that I've done since I've been here. I've given this presentation, I've worked on this cabinet submission, like all these things. Because I think when you're constantly taking on new projects, you're involved in different teams, sometimes we can forget all the things we've done. And when it comes to those conversations, you're kind of stuck in proving yourself. So I would just say setting super loud goals, logging everything you do, and sharing your accomplishments.
Great, thank you. Those are very good words. And in fact, in some ways it seems harder, but in some ways it may be somewhat easier too, because it's hard in the in-person session sometimes to say, look at me, I did this. Whereas you can just send off these things to people saying, here's my, see this what I did? And everyone goes, oh yeah, they get that. Whereas it's hard sometimes to look self-absorbing when you're in a meeting. So both things work, but that's very good advice. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts on that question that's in the chat there about how do you demonstrate your accomplishments for your progress in your work, especially those that say that you need to show your outcomes when you're working in a hybrid environment? Any other comments on that? No. We do have one more that I jumped over before, and we just got a couple minutes here. And it's I think it was in the chat, and it was for you, Noreen, but I think it relates to some of what we've talked about, but it's certainly a good thing for all of us to elaborate on a little bit. It's just what managers and supervisors are equipped with to really, and I think the notion of your agreements sort of speak to that too. So how to successfully manage from a mutual way, successfully manage those settings with supports, etc. And more, in some ways, even more critically, how do you maintain the success and the self-fulfillment for both manager and employee in these flexible spaces? So you set up these agreements, you move along, but how do you keep that reciprocal success going, I guess, because
Thank you for that, Lisa. And Katrina, I mean, summarized it very well, but really, whether you're in person or whether you're not or online, the communication, right, is key. And in any way, shape, or form, it is. Whether you're doing that, and we have many forms right now, right? We went with email, with chats, with picking up the phone, with Teams, right? So that there's many different avenues, but to me, it's a matter of keeping those communication lines open. And again, you do that by the various ways we've talked about, the meetings, the check-in, check-outs, the, having even sessions available that people could drop into is also talked about. Making sure that, again, you through the work plans, you do have those goals and accomplishments, and that, you are, then reporting back on those. And then, when you have your, if there's annual performances anywhere, going back and looking at those work plans and looking at what's been accomplished and all the feedback that was obtained and circling back. And then again, like I said, we do update those agreements on an annual basis. So just, continuously and constantly having that communication, knowing that it's working. And, it is, in some ways, it's no different than if you were physically here versus even not here. It's just, again, the way you do it. But I think the concept is still the same, just making sure, again, that it's deliberate and that there's an understanding. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, that's comes to the end of our question and answer discussion session. We're at just have a few more minutes to wrap up, and I again want to say thank you to Noreen, to Eva, to Krista, and Katrina for sharing your experiences, your knowledge. It's so enlightening to hear from you, and for all of us to hear how you've been working in this context, and gives us all information on the options available for evolving workplaces and the things we need to consider, our pros and cons, etc., for those, and how we keep it sustainable. And in looking at all of the options, I also want to thank participants for all those really challenging questions and important questions. and for how our speakers came earnestly and energetically to comment, to provide the insights. So thank you all, and you know, these sessions and this kind of conversation wouldn't be possible without individuals like yourselves, speakers who are willing to share their time. So again, it's a heartfelt thank you. And we're going to, this session has been recorded and it will be posted on IPAC's YouTube site and also through IPAC Vancouver and Victoria. So again, thank you all so much. And I would like to now turn the floor over to Sonia Zoller, who is the IPAC Victoria Chair, to help wrap up our event in a good way. Over to you, Sonia, and thank you to IPAC Victoria for their great collaboration on this event and with National. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and thanks to all our amazing panelists. It was such a great discussion today. So while I'm actually currently working remotely from Vancouver, IPAC Victoria acknowledges and respects the Lekwungen, the Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory we work, and the Lekwungen and Lisanic peoples whose historical relationships with that land continue to this day. One of the things that really struck me as our panelists were speaking today, especially having also attended the April session, was how there is really no single experience of hybrid work or remote work. We've heard about an incredible array of the benefits, challenges, motivations, strategies for working in office, from remote locations, and from hybrid arrangements. And so I think in discussions about this new work environment, it's really important for employers, supervisors, and also our fellow teammates to keep in mind that we all bring our unique perspectives and knowledges to the workplace. There were so many great points raised today. It's hard to recap them, but I'll do my best. One of the themes that was highlighted is that perhaps today, more than in the past, our interactions with people really need to be planned and deliberate, which can raise some new challenges for managers that have people working in office and also remotely at the same time. We heard about from the perspective of co-op students and interns, but probably any new professional, that the challenges can include isolation for some people. New teammates, especially those without a lot of in-office experience, might need a bit of support in making those connections and building relationships over virtual platforms. But as managers, we can help to foster those opportunities by setting up mentoring opportunities and taking the time to get to know people on a personal level, informal level, one-on-one. New professionals can be proactive about networking. We heard some great examples about that, participating socially when possible and meeting people outside of work. And the key really does seem to be to get to know people as individuals outside of their professional lives. Who are they and what makes them tick? On the more personal level, we heard of some of the benefits about the flexibility of hybrid work arrangements. Krista shared about how invaluable it has been to navigate her role in proximity to the nations that her branch is working with, and being able to return to her territory, culture, and family at the same time as advancing skills and accumulating experience and fulfilling those other important roles that we all play in our communities. And Katrina shared some of the more practical elements that sometimes aren't always obvious or named, like eliminating long commutes, saving money by avoiding buying lunches and coffees, and just having more free time to pursue those activities that enrich our lives. So before I wrap up, I just want to note for everyone that IPAC members can attend events for free through either of our regional groups, whether they're in Vancouver, hosted in Vancouver, or by Victoria. So keep an eye out for future webinars and other great events by subscribing to our joint newsletter, and I put the link into the chat. So much gratitude to Noreen, Eva, Krista, and Katrina, and to our audience today for participating. I hope you all have a great day.